So I'll go ahead and just briefly introduce. My role is actually very simple for this meeting today. I get the first 5 minutes to introduce everybody else who's much more important for me than me, and much more important for the functioning of the hackathon. So very briefly, I'll introduce myself. My name's Kogen Shimizu. I'm the Semantic Technologies Chair, or Committee Chair for ESIP, and that's how I kind of got involved with all of this. Jonathan Blythe, Colin Smith, and Martina are going to be doing a hackathon on the complex citation object and talking about various tooling and infrastructure that's going to be needed, overall architecture for this. I think it's going to be a really lovely time. The overall thrust of this is to generate community contributed improvements to the overall infrastructure. And this will happen through some talks from the motivation that'll come from Martina and from Jonathan, and then an actual 30 to 40 minute hackathon that will happen later on in the session from Colin. There's a number of links that you guys can see in the, how do you say this? Kiko chat, right? So take a look there. There's all of the links, all of the different directory for the resources, and so on. So I guess that's a little bit less than 5 minutes. I talked quite quickly, but I'll pass it to Jonathan because I think the actual interesting stuff comes in all of this other stuff. So happy to be involved. I'll be floating in and out as much as I can. Thanks.
Thanks, Kogan. So our first speaker is Martina Stockhouse, and her background, she's bring with her experience from supporting the IPCC. We'll be talking about some of her work there with documenting how data supports the assessment, the figures in the IPCC assessment document. So I'll pass it to her. Colin will be giving some of the more technical introduction, architecture, and I think he called it a marketplace, but I'm waiting to hear what that means, what that will actually look like. And then we'll open it up. We'll stay in the main room for the hackathon with the option to do breakouts if needed. But the idea is we have a small group now, and to make a conversation among these experts to help us kick off this activity. So Martina will be first, and I'll be then wrapping up at the last 10 minutes to talk about next steps. Okay, thank you.
I think I shared not the window I wanted to share, so let's try it again. Here. Here we are. So, thanks for the introduction, Jonathan, and thanks for everyone joining. It's good to have some new faces interested in complex citation. So I will give the high-level introduction, a bit of motivation, and I will do that along the example that I know best, and that's the IPCC use case, which I brought to the complex citation group. I briefly want to acknowledge all the different groups which have contributed to it, from IPCC and the RDA group. So as introduction, what was our motivation? So DataCite was founded, I think, in 2009, and it is around for more than 15 years, and we still don't see the uptake of data citations as we hoped for, and there are several reasons. One is the technical reason. So data is still a different thing. We have a high number of data sets. Often they are more dynamic. So if we look into data, it's analyzed. Parts of the data is used, or for software, it's combined and it has different components which are used. So it's not the same as a paper, which is something new, which is published, you have to do all the similarity reports as editor. So it's really something new and not something as complex and combined like we have with the data case. And these technical issues is what we are targeting in the complex citation recommendation. There are other more community reasons why the uptake is not as we wished for. One is that the whole system of credit, providing credit for science, is centered around peer-reviewed articles and not so much about data, though data plays an important role for the traceability and transparency, or in short, open science. We have all these domain repositories, so the publishers don't want to take up the data, but it's still something which is kind of a task of the authors to take care of the data, and the synchronization of workflows is also not there. So there's a lot of community change and alignment of different workflows also needed, and I will show that with the IPCC example a little bit. And the other part is that still, if the resources are not there and the capacity is not there, data and software is the first thing which is left out as secondary importance. And the solution we came up with to deal with these high numbers of data sets and software samples is that we want to create something which we call a complex citation object, which is a kind of box which contains all the other objects where the science is really the content, which we call linked digital objects. So as the science is more in these data and software objects, in the linked digital objects, that's where the credit needs to be assigned, and that's why we have to change the indexing and publication systems to take care that the credit is not attributed to the complex citation object, but to the linked digital objects which are contained in the CCO. We opened it up, that came from not only the IPCC use case, but a part of others, is the provenance, the traceability as some importance, and to enable knowledge graphs to discover the traceability of a publication or a data product. But that's not the key aspect. Just to say, we will stay with a simple case of many data sets here. And the last piece is also an advantage. So publishers have it much easier if they use just the CCO and don't care about the contents, and the infrastructure persons like us take care of the rest, that the whole complex citation works. And that's what we are here about. That's one component of that. And with that, I come to the IPCC use case as a motivation and maybe a blueprint of other use cases. So IPCC is the comprehensive assessment of the world's climate. Every 6 or 7 years, the large assessment reports are published. They are based on peer-reviewed literature. As every other scientific publication, this is also the case for IPCC, but we know it's data intensive. Key aspects for IPCC are: one, traceability. We want to know how the results were generated, and we focus on figures because that's where we have data products and can trace it back to input data, like the scientific base of it. Credit plays an important role for IPCC, credit and licenses, so giving credit for input or scientific data, like CMAP6, is also one of the motivations, and preservation. So every piece of data software which was used should be stewarded on the long term and kept accessible on the long term. So that's something which is also a key aspect of IPCC. And of course, supporting the whole workflow and at the core of it, it's to support the authors in providing all the requested information. On the right-hand side, it's a high-level vision that we have. We don't think we will be able to fully implement that, but that's at least our vision. We start at the top with the authors. So they work on the report and generate the figures. They get some training and guidance how to do that. And on the other hand, they are parts of the community. They apply either their own tools or community tools. Then we have a layer where we gather the information, and we have so-called DDC partners, which is a joint collaboration of different repositories in the data distribution center. That's where DDC stands for, which take care of different parts of the data. Then we have the editorial team, which is the technical support unit, which is, like any other editor, publishing or preparing the report for publication. Among that, we have a digital version which contains a so-called figure page, which contains the information how the figure was generated and gives access to software and data. And that could be the core if we extend a little bit of information for a complex citation landing page, or complex citation object landing page, to be more precise. So that's a vision how that could work. Just to stress that we have two parts. So upstream, we are discussing more towards provenance because it's an established standard and some of the community tools are already using it. So we want to use provenance standard for generating the information we need by community tools, gather that from the authors, store it in their GitHub repo, and then use it for two purposes. One is the long-term archival of input data, which is not stored in a long-term archive already. So that's then a host of an LDO, the Data Distribution Center. And the second is, of course, our complex citation object. We see it more as a documentation of what was done, and we want to refer to them in the figure captions. So the figure is directly then linked to the figure landing page, which gives access to all the information or the contained information in the CCO. And motivation for IPCC is also that we link the report to the data and we can document the data usage. And just to stress again, all the components which are shown there needs to be stored on the long term, so should be stored in a data distribution center or a long-term data archive. We have made a proof of concept. I have the links here for AR6 based on CMIP data. So it was just a small bit of data we stored in the BDC. And this is a very abstract early draft of what the CCO content could be. There are different input data projects. Sometimes they have internal structure. There's code which was applied to generate the figures. We call the data final data. Then we have a chapter reference and the provenance. So that's more or less what we aim at or have as a vision. There are multiple challenges. One is we need to integrate the whole IPCC and the complex citation in the process of the IPCC, starting with the authors. And that has multiple steps. And every time you change procedures or change the content of the report, you need the approval of the IPCC Bureau. And that's also something where you need to convince persons which are not data persons. We have a high number of stakeholders involved, partly within IPCC, partly outside, which is making it a bit more complicated. The next challenge could also become an advantage, and that is integrating data into the ERRO protocol that IPCC has. And I think it will make it easier if we have CCOs because we have an explicit relationship from the figure to the data which was used. So it's much more transparent and easier to identify which data was used for reproducing or changing or mending these errors. And we have a significant lack of capacity because there are more urgent challenges currently, which you are very aware of. But there are a lot of benefits. So the traceability of IPCC outputs, it's much improved. We can strengthen the transparency of IPCC, not only the report, but also the organization. And the credit can, for the first time, be really attributed to the scientific data providers. And that brings me to the other side, to the complex citation initiative. The problem is quite old and has been discussed in different groups so far, but the first time the right group of people came together, which really said we want to solve the problem and not only discuss it, was at the AGU4 meeting in 2020. And there were follow-up meetings which led to the formation or establishment of an RDA group, so a cross-domain group, which was called Complex Citation Working Group, which ended after 18 months with the recommendations which were published and which this work is based on. We are now continuing the work in the so-called Complex Citation Implementation Interest Group and have published our first results at the International Data Week in Brisbane in October. And we had a hackathon, a first one focusing more on the metadata standard. And so this is the second, which is focusing more on the generator, on the technical aspects. And just to say how are we organized in RDA? We have 2 task groups so far, starting with a technical group, which I'm leading, and Jonathan is kind of co-leading. Which is focusing on the upstream pieces. So everything on generating a CCO, developing standards for the metadata and guidance to generate CCOs. The second group is led by James Aliff, a UK colleague, which is called Implementation Task Group. And that focuses on everything which has to be done and implemented to make to assign the credit for the input data or for the linked digital objects. So it starts with, we have a CCO, and now how do we assign the credit to the right people? So it's about guidance and getting stakeholders involved, publishers, editors, data sites. So it's a lot of communication. The last group hasn't started. It's the adoption task group, and I would just say it's capacity building and bringing our solution to the community. And that's the last slide. So if you are interested to join our RDA interest group, you find the link here. There's no charge involved. There's no high traffic. If you not only want to follow what we are doing, but also get more active, you are welcome to join our meetings. We have weekly meetings, which are alternating between the technical and implementation task group. And they are Mondays in 2 time zones. One is 1 p.m. UTC, and the second is at 10 p.m. UTC. Yeah, and of course, we are open as co-chairs for your questions, so you can approach us directly as well. And that's all what I have on the high level.
That was perfect timing. We only gave her 15 minutes because we want to reserve the balance, the time really for the hackathon. So next we have Colin, and he's going to present the work he's done to set up the development, the architecture, the notional architecture, and marketplace. So Colin, please take it away.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Martina. Let me get my screen shared here. Let's see. Okay, can you see the title slide there? Okay, excellent. Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here kicking this off with you. So as Martina covered, we all know why we're here, to solve this data citation scaling problem where modern research relies on hundreds and thousands of distinct data sets, software tools, related resources. There we go. Get on the right slide. But traditional lists and PDFs just can't handle that volume. And that's why we are building the complex citation object generator. So let me just check one thing. Okay, there we go. So our requirements for this tool are pretty clear. We need a system that can ingest massive lists of persistent identifiers or parse large bibtex files. But we don't just want a list returned. We need to collate those into a single structured aggregation that follows the object reuse and exchange standard. This output needs to be a valid JSON graph that machines can read and understand. And crucially, this tool has to be portable. We aren't just building this for us. We want journals and repositories to be able to deploy this themselves. And finally, it needs to close the loop by talking to repositories like Zenodo to actually mint DOI for that collection. Oops. Okay. So how are we going to build this? We've come up with an architecture that we think solves these core issues. First, we have the core layer, the brain. It's a pure Python library that handles all the domain logic, parsing inputs, validating metadata, and generating the ORE graph. It has no web dependencies, which means a researcher could technically use this in an offline script if they wanted to, or it could be hooked into an automated process to generate CCOs for some large data synthesis process. And then that layer is, then what we wrap around that is the service layer. And this is the body. It's the fast API web application that handles sessions and API requests. And then finally, on the front end, we're looking at a really basic React single page application. And then wiring that all together, making it easy to hand off to other institutions. We containerize it with Docker. So now I want to highlight 3 specific patterns we're using to manage or help manage complexity. This is not by all means all of them that we may need, but these are a few to give you a sense. First is a strategy pattern for ingestion. So inputs are messy. We might get a clean bibtex file, or we might get a raw list of DOIs. We're defining a base ingester interface so that we can swap out these strategies depending on what the user throws at us. Second is a adapter pattern for publication. Today we want to publish to Zenodo, but tomorrow we might want to publish to Dryad or Figshare. We don't want to have to rewrite the core logic every time, so we're using repository adapters to handle those specific API calls. And then finally, we're using async workers. If a user uploads 1,000 DOIs, fetching the titles and any other relevant metadata for those that we want to include in the CCO takes time. We don't want the UI to freeze, so we're offloading that to background tasks. So focus areas. This is, where you all come in. We've set up a GitHub repository and we've populated issues with some key focus areas. There's something here for everyone. Parsers and ingestion. If you like parsing text, we need your help writing the bibtext ingester to map those files into our internal models. Data modeling. If you're a metadata expert, we could use your help defining the pydantic models to strictly enforce that ORE schema. Adapters. We need someone to build the initial Zenodo adapter handling the reserved DOI and publish to Zenodo cycle. For the front end, we need a UI that can gracefully handle loading those states while the back end crunches through 1,000 citations or 1,000 DOIs. State management, we're using Redis for temporary sessions. If you're, like back-end work, ensuring we handle the session expiration correctly is a high-value task, for example. And DevOps, of course, if you want to refine our Docker setup or write tests, just please jump into those. But before we start coding, I want to be super clear about the philosophy here. We have an architecture decision record defined in the repo, but note that this is a draft. That architecture is a blueprint, not the law. We want to leverage your expertise. If you look at something and you're thinking, there's a much better way to do this, then please propose it and do it. If you have, you have the discretion to implement these things as you see fit, but please just keep an open communication via issues and make sure the ARD is edited to reflect any major changes that occur. We really, want you to poke holes in the design. We want this to be a collaborative effort. And importantly, we're focusing on a minimum viable product. We aren't necessarily trying to write production perfect code right now, but if that happens, great. We really just want to get a system working end to end and then we could just refine that later. So just a few notes on logistics. We have a very short session today. And we're definitely not going to finish this tool in the remaining time that we have. I want you to think of this as this session as kind of like a kickoff for a week-long hackathon. If you get hooked into a problem, feel free to keep working on it between sessions in the evenings or whenever you have downtime this week. I'll be standing by all week to answer questions and review pull requests and triage issues and so forth. We've created a Slack channel, and the GitHub link is here. The Slack channel is in the ESIP Slack, and if you can't reach that, I can help get you added. And yes, we have a contributing file to help guide your contributions. So I think, feel free to just grab an issue, fork the repo, start coding, start a conversation right now. If you'd like, I could give you a quick walk through the repo just to show you how that's set up. But otherwise, happy to just, open it up to questions and kind of general discussion at this point regarding the architecture. Or we could do both, whatever. But yeah, let's do it. Let's get to work. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Let me jump over to the repo real quick. I'll just give you a quick orientation to what we got going there, and then we'll open it up and chat about things if we need to. So let me actually share my desktop again real quick. And okay, here it is. Hopefully you guys have access to this. Just message everyone real quick. So here it is. Contributing files here. The top level README has instructions for running Docker Compose and getting everything wired together. The code is organized into those three layers: the core, front end, and service. Within each of these directories, there's a README that helps you get started. So if you just want to focus on the core layer, you can dive in here, get your Python environment set up, and start working. Similar for the front end and the service layers. Gosh, what else? Any other questions about this? I just feel free to explore issues. We've created a series of issues that kind of touch on the major components and kind of the big pieces that we think need to get built out. But again, this is just very much our best take at it, and we're really looking to you guys for your expertise.
Just so I understand, the issues, are they the marketplace that you were talking about?
Yeah. Go in there, find something that really piques your interest and converse or build whatever you would like to do there.
So everybody rushed through their segment of time, so we still have an hour, which is great.
Perfect.
We could talk. Colin could speak for longer, going through issues that he's identified. But I think the value of this session is to have people from the community spontaneously, come up with input that can benefit the effort. While we have, you in the room, we can work together on this problem.
And I'm just going to be hanging out, trying to unblock people's work. If anybody's stuck with something, I'm going to, try to help alleviate that. Corey, I'm good to see you. I'm not hearing you though.
How is this?
That's great.
Better? Thanks. Yeah. Really excited to be following this work. This is leaning into understanding this project is new to me. So there's a lot that, I'm just kind of at square one on, but seems really interesting. Interested in both the stuff that you were talking about, Colin, as well as like the IPC use case. My work is in the carbon removal industry and data standards there. So a different angle of that problem, but potentially one of the kinds of inputs of data sets that you all might be looking to track with that. So I'm just trying to understand the context for this call in relationship to. So is the thought that this is an invitation for folks to be engaging with getting involved in some of this technical work throughout the week, and that the session today is this session now at this point in time is more about developing like shared understanding of it so that people then can at different points throughout the week work, or is it that like this is a working session this hour, or that was, yeah, maybe I missed that at the very beginning.
So I can speak to this. I think the person you want to address the question is Colin, because he's set up the repo. And so just naively, I'm not a developer myself, but I think the way this would work is you go ahead and take some time to install, the code that he's initialized, and actually run with one of the issues, or use this time to understand how to do that. And then over the next week, we will have opportunities to meet up, like in the coffee, the birds of a feather, or the poster session, other opportunities. And then we have this working group that meets pretty regularly, that we could bring this in as a regular topic on Martina's technical session. So not really asking anybody to like get signed up right now, but to like kind of poke at the problem that we've identified and see if this is of interest, and if you have any thoughts on how to proceed.
Cool, thanks. So if there's like software being worked on, I guess a question that I have is like, is there a draft or like a finalized specification for what a CCO is? I don't know if that's a basic question. Sorry if other folks are already well aware of that, but that would kind of be something that I'd like a little clarity on, is like, and where is that resource available?
I sent some a template to Colin. So for background, Martina hosted a hackathon on data standardization back in October, and we used a template for that hackathon. However, so it was based on it's JSON LD with as the core vocab, the schema.org.
Mhm.
But obviously, it would use a variety of other lists of terms like PROV, the ORE standard. Those are all referenced in context and used as the core standard for CCOs. So, however, I have to say that hackathon did not give us a definitive or final version, like first version of the CCO template. So it's still very much in development. We can share that, what we use for the standardization hackathon. Just have to find it. I'll put it in the chat. Unless Colin has put it somewhere already.
So Stephen has his hand up.
I was just, following in the same line of thinking. That was kind of my first question as well. Is there a JSON schema or some shackle rules or something that tell me what this CCO is supposed to look like? And I'm also pretty low on the curve here. I haven't read your papers or anything, but is the idea? So I see in your examples in the CCO generator repo, there's an input which looks like it's just a list of identifiers essentially, and so is the idea that somebody who's doing some kind of data project would compile a list of all their sources as identifiers, and then it would get fed to this generator that would generate the CCO document. And then that CCO document gets a DOI. Did I follow things correctly there? And then in the publication, you would reference the CCO as opposed to all the hundreds of little pieces you worked with. Is that the workflow?
Yeah. So I think the inside, and sorry, I just like to respond to everything, but Colin or Martina, please jump in if you have a thought about this.
That sounds like Steve. That sounds like the workflow that we're after. Yeah, and the ORE OAI specification, I think, is the closest thing that we have at this point to a schema. And gosh, what am I missing? Yeah, was there another component to the question? I forgot.
Just the workflow and what the use case is when you have the CCO. What happens to it?
And so Martina can speak to how she did it for that Zenodo proof of concept. So you can go to that link and see how she can speak to that now.
Yeah, so we really didn't have any standardized metadata schema, but we just thought through our use case and to make all the specifications that we need to make our use case work. And as said, it's the long list of data sets which were used. It's also a connection between report and data. And we came up with a very simple JSON, I would say, which captures all that. And the benefit was, I think, that we came up with a lot of questions. We thought it's just easy. We just have this long list, and then we decided, well, there is a relationship. We don't have for every input data set a DOI. What do we do? We want the traceability and the citation and credit. What do we do? So I think that was the benefit of that. And just to mention the hackathon, which Jonathan spoke about. So in the end, we opened the discussion up again. So we thought we can prove our draft standard schema for the CCO and have the draft consolidated after the hackathon. That was the idea. But what happened was that we opened the discussion up again on what source, which external standards we want to include. I understood it's important to open it up again, but that's why we don't have these final standardized metadata schema at this point.
Yeah, so maybe it's better we don't provide the template because it's not final. But I certainly can. I'll be happy to share that once I find it. Let's take questions from John and Adam, so we're making the best use of these people's time while we're on the call together. John?
Hey, Jonathan. This is John Ralph at NCEI. It sounds to me like there's a conceptual agreement, perhaps, of what this thing might be, but it also sounds like it may be too early for an implementation if we don't have an actual specification for the metadata that we all agree on. So then what we end up is trying to work on some conceptual implementations where your CCO would contain, ideally, references to objects in various schemas. And it gets really messy really fast. And so I'm not quite sure how to resolve that with some more technical ideas like, a JSON object which references other objects, but some of them have DOIs. Do they all need to have persistent identifiers? How does one resolve those identifiers? If it is a DOI, you can use, of course, the various DOI APIs to receive DataCite metadata for those objects and do something with those, similar to the way that you've already discussed using BibTeX objects, which have a related but slightly different schema. It seems a bit early to be thinking about implementation because of there's, as you say, the discussion has been opened up again. And so there isn't a complete agreement, it sounds to me, about these schemas. But maybe, Adam, you were going to comment something along those lines.
I'm definitely coming in really naive here, so I appreciate everyone's questions. And my question is probably similar to yours, John, and Stephen's for that matter. I was curious if, and I apologize if you have, talked about this at the beginning of the talk. And I was curious if like the DOI mentors are on board with this strategy, or the journals of parsing the ORE. I was just curious if someone could comment on that, like how far we've made progress on the social side.
We have Shelley Stahl is leading the effort. She represents AGU, which is a publisher of many science journals. So this is being motivated by AGU and the open science mission that she leads. We've been given parameters, sort of like engineering constraints on how we build this out, implement it. And so those are very well understood by the technical group and will have to be sort of enforced by the software. So we want to make it as easy as possible for authors to generate CCOs. We want to make it as easy as possible by journals to sort of, to cite them, to cite the data, and thousands of data sets in those articles. And there's some complexity constraints for the CCO itself. So everything must be listed as a flat listing. We can't have hierarchies saying all of these resources plus the resources in this other CCO. So everything has to be resolved at one level, even though we know that there's relationships between those resources, because we can't handle that complexity as part of this registering the CCO with DataCite and navigating that environment.
Thanks, Jonathan. Maybe I could just follow up with a quick, maybe clarification on my question. I was more concerned about, like, is this work actually going to drive the impact and generate results that are actionable, or are we just creating another hoop for DataCite and other DOI mentors to jump through that? We're then dependent on them to implement something on their end to make this all work. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't. Impact has specific meaning in, like, citation scores. Is that what you mean? Impact of an article?
Yeah, sorry, I
measured?
apologize. By impact, I meant, like, if we do all this work, does it mean that all the various data sets that got used on a paper or a new data set, are they going to get more visibility because of this? Or are we depending on the researchers who use a paper to, like, open up the ORE and just do that discovery themselves? Or is there something automated downstream of doing this work that delivers all that content in a machine actionable way? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. It's the easier one. It's going to make everything a lot easier for everybody. The technology will be enabling to improve data citation. The primary premise is we want to give credit to the data creators, also other research objects like software, code. Those research objects should get cited, and so it'll enable that at larger scale than what's currently possible in AGO journals, and for like the IPCC use case and many others. So it has the potential to be, the development of this tool has the potential to kind of raise the bar on data citation across the board, not just in the earth sciences. So we're actually hoping we'll get other communities involved as well.
Maybe I can make a quick addition to that. So the other side where we need someone on board is DataCite, because we have identified DataCite as the registration agency for the CCOs. So this is the upfront, or the first part of the whole complex citation, and Jonathan was talking about the second part on making the CCO work in the end. And with DataCite, we have made the connection. They are open to support us, but they also need more concrete information, what we are heading at. And to be honest, we have to convince them. They are open, but we have to convince them that this is worthwhile, but we need them on board, because this is one of the registration agencies which is in contact with Crossref, and we don't want to open up another publisher of data-related content. So I think that's something we decided on, to get DataCite on board.
I think one way I think we can motivate this more is if we look at the example. And Colin asked, he didn't let me know before today, but this morning he's like, "Oh, Jonathan, you're going to be central to discussing the example." So I put in a list of LDOs. It's in the example. One of them here is the NCEI Go Maps collection record. And I'm not really poking at this, on purpose, but I work at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. We funded Go Maps. The data are partially archived at NCEI, and I have some familiarity with that system because over 10 years ago I was working there and know their archive system. So this is where this started for me, is trying to just figure out, here's a collection of data. So is this okay if I go into this rabbit hole for a minute? I'll share my screen and show us. What's that? I just lost my screen. So this is the ESIP Slack space. I wanted to find the NCEI page. Maybe I still have it. Okay, so NCEI does this nice thing for some data sets where they create collection level pages. And you can go on here and find all the things you might expect for a landing page. There's actually a granule search. You can find all the granules associated with that. Lots of good metadata. Here's a little geospatial extent. Here's some links. Description. Okay, so when you send a machine to this linked digital object, what is it going to do? How is it going to extract the information it needs for the CCO? And that's what the ORE standard was intended to do, is it helps it map all the links on this landing page and understand it, so to speak. So some links would be just simply there for human reference, like this show more link, if that's even a link. But there's these, link to a graphic. That's itself is a file that is accessible from the page. But how do you differentiate that from, say, an access link? Or so here's John Rolfe raising his hand. I will stop there, and then I can pick up again if needed.
All right. It's John Rell from NCEI. It's a really interesting example, Jonathan. So if you were a machine and you hit this landing page URL, embedded in the HTML is a JSON LD schema.org payload. So if you view the source for this page in your browser and share that with us, please. Yeah, view page source down there at the bottom of that menu. Right. And if you scroll down a little bit, just right there at the bottom of the page is a schema that you're scrolling through it right now. A schema.org package, which payload, which includes most of the content of that metadata human readable page that we were viewing, but in a machine readable context. So Adam, of course, is familiar with this, as maybe many of you are. And this payload has all of that stuff that you're interested in as a machine following the links in this collection record. And that's how you would do it. You wouldn't use the human readable HTML stuff because it's ugly, because you can't tell what it is except by eye. But the schema.org stuff is fully qualified and documented in a way that a machine can understand, which is why it's there in the first place. So it seems to me like there are a couple of different sort of competing representations here. One is schema.org, which gives you what you want in a format that a machine can read and can follow and can parse. But then you're talking about DOIs, the DOI minters, and of course DataCite and therefore DataCite metadata. And it seems to me we would need compatibility with both of those at the very least. And then extending those to be able to support the whole CCO concept. I hope that helps answer your question there, Jonathan.
Yeah, this is, I never looked at the source, but this is really good. And I think this is super verbose. It's got so much information. I don't know that we need all of this for the CCO. So,
No, I would agree. This is really, the schema.org represents everything that we know about the collection, and a little bit about what the granules contain, but it is not the same as a CCO, right? Now you could reference a CCO from the schema.org metadata and follow that chain, akin to what Doug was saying in the chat. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is not the CCO itself. This is a way that the CCO could be communicated, could be linked to, could be discovered by a machine that's trying to follow this chain from this data set.
Yeah, so from the generator's perspective, I'm giving the generator this source link, okay? And it's going to go in here and extract the information it needs for the CCO. So it might need this title. I don't know. That's still a debate if we need to have that kind of information in the CCO. What's more important probably are the relationships to data sets.
And all those are in there. And so it's a matter of, yeah, thanks, Doug. It's just a matter of essentially teaching your scraper what it needs to get from the schema.org and what it doesn't need, what it can ignore. Well, actually, you don't even have to teach it that. You just don't teach it to do anything with it. And from there, it seems fairly straightforward, as it would be to extract the interesting information from a data site XML response from the DOI API to fill out your CCO object with information from a DOI, a research object with a DOI, I should say.
Okay, so let's put a pin in that. That's NCEI. Now here's something completely different. Part of the same CCO is the data that was archived at OBIS-CMAP. And for that, I just have a link to the landing page, the search landing page, but it has these data sets as its parts. I've already run that website query. I can find it. It's up here. It's always in the way. Okay. Somehow I was able to contort these, because they don't have like just a URL I can go to find this collection. This is the closest thing they have to what NCEI provided, which is collection level record for all the GoMaps data sets. And so now we're putting an LDO for OBIS-CMAP, and he has to go to all these LDOs and offline kind of compile that list of resources formatted into the CCO metadata. And there's one, and I could show you a third for this same one. We had tags that were archived with the IUSE. They had the animal telemetry network. So it's another view, like another database. Go over here, find these records. What's slightly nuanced is sometimes, like this OBIS-CMAP, the LDO might be to a search landing page or to a set of data that are a superset of what you used in your publication. So by referring to all the children, you want to create a context-specific collection to say, no, this is actually just a collection of these records from OBIS-CMAP. The CCO should be able to construct that unique subset that's in the CCO metadata. I think with that, I'm going to stop sharing.
Jonathan, by unique subset, you mean those pieces of that larger data set identified by those DLIs that you listed?
Yeah, so like in the list, there is all the information you need because you know all the children elements that are comprised of that collection. The parent element to the CMAP data, the CMAP database, will reference lots of other data from the Gulf of Mexico, but those aren't part of the CCO. So it needs to have logic to know how to construct these as is part of relationships in the CCO. And Martina's example is much better a much better example of this because, actually in Go Maps for NCEI, there's a perfect coupling. The collection has all the children, and all the children are listed from that collection. But with the IPCC, the AR6, it's a modeling output. There are so many modeling runs, and for any figure, it's a many-to-many relationship. You might have that same model run being used in multiple figures, and that figure is referencing multiple model outputs. And they're organized at their host repositories into collections that have nothing to do with the figures. So it is kind of a complex situation that you need a CCO to manage and get that traceability that she's looking for, how to reproduce the figures.
It almost sounds, Jonathan, like you're getting into that sort of gray area between citability and reproducibility, where it's not that you don't just want to identify the data set, but you also want to try to, in a machine actionable way, identify the portion of the data set that you used on a specific day to do a specific research task. And this is actually an area where I think publishers have shied away from that reproducibility side to some degree. So just keep that in mind.
Maybe I can make a quick comment. That's absolutely right for the IPCC example, what you say. IPCC was interested in reproducibility, or we are a bit more cautious and say traceability, because then you know which data sets went into a data product. But if you go to these large data collections, like for model data, you produce the model data in one model run. And so usually you cite it together. For credit, it makes sense if you are oriented on the data creator's point of view. So you cite the bundle which was created or generated by a model run and want to get the impact of the model run and not the impact of multiple thousands or even 10,000s of individual outputs and variables. So it really makes sense. And the tension was really to get these two together, the citation bit and the usage bit, I would say, and traceability. So if you use the data, it's really a selection of the one who reuses the data. It's small bits out of many collections because you compare. That's the usual thing you do if you analyze model information. You want to have a good statistic, so you have small bits of maybe a couple of data sets across many different citations. And the second aspect we have in IPCC is also we have different repositories which are responsible for providing different pieces of the data. So we have input data stored at one repository, another category, and a second one. And then it gets really tricky. You can't host it at one repository you usually have really only the metadata across different repositories. So, well, for me, it was the only solution to really have these very basic metadata, just focusing on what is necessary to have really the identifiers in it, and only the sufficient content to enable credit assignment, and for IPCC also identify which data sets went into. So we have the two layers where we try to capture in the complex citation, one for the citation and the other for the individual data sets which don't have a DOI, but it can be identified by a persistent identifier. So I don't know if that's more adding to the confusion, but the short answer is yes. The motivation for the IPCC example was to bring these two aspects together, reproducibility of the product and credit for the large input data collections.
We have a question from Corey.
Thanks. So just this is a question that's supporting me just trying to fully understand the really specific problem domain that CCO is trying to solve. It sounds like one of the tensions here is that there is working groups and stuff ongoing around DOIs, for instance, and how those evolve, and maybe similar parallel stuff with the existence of science on schema.org and the ways that JSON-LD gets represented at repositories via the stuff that John was showing. The question that I have to help just like my own understanding of the focus of CCO is like, if hypothetically we had a world where DOIs were accessible for all data sets, so every data set had a DOI, in addition to an article having a DOI, and there was versioning supported for all DOIs, and that was well adopted. What in that world would still be missing that CCO is an initiative? Like, let's say that the DOI community solves those two things. What is there left that's still needed from what this group is trying to work on that would need to get addressed?
Yeah, so even in that world, remember CCO is focused around a publication concept. So it's a snapshot for a period of time. And the authors of the publication want to give credit to data and other research objects they used for that publication. So it will be, you can think of it as simply as a list of LDOs that they used and they want to give credit to. That normally would be much more than what a journal article would be able to handle through the traditional method of listing data sets and other research objects in the reference section. So it should be 40 or more non-traditional references. What's missing from that ideal world is you might have the latest, greatest version of everything and all the previous versions, but you'd have a very hard time figuring out, well, for that article, what did they actually use? What was the initial conditions in their space when they created their research article? And that's important for giving credit because, the authors of things change over time. So it gives credit to the right people. Also, it provides basic traceability, although we're not trying to take over the provenance space and make, modeling, make the analysis reproducible. We just want to do simple credit giving so those resources are identified, not necessarily how they were computed on.
So that I think that makes a lot of sense. That helps clarify a lot for me. My reflection on that is that by calling the project complex citation object, it sounds like my first read of what it is that we're trying to do is to enhance citations and to enhance a single list of all the references section. Like, what's our references v2 basically? But in hearing what you said, it sounds actually like maybe a different approach, and one that might be more reasonable, at least for my, like, the way that I would think about it, is what if we divorce the idea of references and actually, like, the whole, and maybe this is already how you guys are thinking about it, but it's really like, let's not think about this as like what is a references v2, but really the core of the problem is like, what is a set of ways that we deal with data set citations and research reproducibility as a separate thing from the paper citations, from the references list. And like, that is that conversation already happening with the journals, and is there traction there? But to me, that feels like the first step is like a consensus understanding that like we actually need something beyond this references list, and that's something that is much more about like people getting on board with it than just like designing the right data model.
So if you've got if you cite one data set for a publication, the CCO recommendation would be don't make a CCO, because you have a tool to do that already using traditional references cited, and you can put the direct link to the data set. For other journal articles, there can be hundreds of articles you cite in a journal article. The journals have no problem including those in reference sections. So let's not fix something that's not broken. It's data sets that we're having trouble with. But other research objects like software, you might call it all data because it's all digital, but videos, images, these are all different kinds of research objects. Also, one of our use cases is physical samples. So sometimes there's some cases where there are thousands of physical samples used in a research article, and it's not possible to cite them. So that's same. So I'd say digital stuff except for the physical samples. And who knows, it might apply to other research objects.
And I'd like to challenge what you said, that we can solve that every data set can be cited with a DOI. I think not all communities want to do that. For our modeling community, the meaning of the impact of a specific variable is meaningless in the end. So they want to cite it on these collection levels and not on this data set level, which would be more convenient for the traceability. But I don't see it happen in the high volume community, that they want to have DOIs which are meant for citing data on that granularity. I think we will have to deal with these different granularities where citation might not be possible on the data set level. And credit should not be assigned there. They don't want it. So you would move the complexity to a different level. Then you have it on the aggregation of the impact.
Yeah, so there's been an active group on the RDA working group for discussing all these permutations and ideas for a while. And so I think we could talk about that for a long time. What I'd like to do is bring it back to the CCO generator and the idea of creating open source code, drawing upon the ESIP community, our respective expertise in this. And we only will succeed if it's a tool that the community will use. People aren't going to develop this. There's no value proposition for them. They don't see anything at the end of the rainbow that they will be able to implement in their own repositories or their own research. So Do we have? Let's see. Colin, why don't you come back in with the hackathon? Try to focus us back on the task at hand.
I mean, I think this is a great use of our time right now, exploring some of these, these edge cases and different perspectives on how to look at this problem, and just let alone really understand what we're after here. Was there anything in particular that came to mind, Jonathan? I mean, are you looking for? Yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about that? What did you want to do?
Yeah, so we have a forum on the RDA working group if we want to talk, and Martina's technical group. We want to talk about some of the implications with this. How this this whole enterprise is supposed to work for data citation using CCOs. What we were hoping to do is take it down one level and talk about the relatively small component of the workflow, which is authors creating an article and then minting a CCO to support that. So how would they do that? And how can we bring technology to bear to make that easier, scalable to some of these real use cases? And what Martina said is they won't all be DOIs. I think what we really mean is they're not all actually LDOs. Sometimes we're just pointing to URLs, websites, places that might not have, the greatest machine readability at the onset. So for the generator to harvest. There's other components to the notional architecture, like registering the CCO with DataCite, formatting it. John's racist.
Yeah, Jonathan. It's in some ways it sounds like, well, from what you were just describing, the problem is sort of at two levels. One is there is a research object that you need to document, and then the next step is and include in a CCO. But first, you have to have done that step of documenting that object. And as you say, it might have a DOI. It might have some other ID. It might just be a web link. It might be a physical paper that's not yet online in a digital form. So you have to document it as, offline. And if that is sort of the initial problem, that one's pretty straightforward in some senses, because you can either provide a DOI, which that's really easy, right? Because there's a service that will give you all the metadata. Or, like you said, a BibTeX object, or an RIS format bibliographic file. That's a well-described format that libraries use and publishers use. And there's a couple other of these, EndNote, for example. There's a bunch of these formats that represent research objects, papers, journal articles, books, etc. If you can translate those into whatever the format is for the CCO, then great. Maybe that's kind of where the effort should start, is supporting as many of those as possible. And then that takes care of the kind of relatively easy cases. DataCite metadata is another one of those, right? You can get that, like I say, from the DOI APIs, or you can get it from individual data providers as well, in some cases. The other ones where you need to describe a thing and you don't really have the information you need in a machine readable format, that's kind of ugly. And there's no way around either manually filling out a form or using AI to parse some text. I don't know how else you would attack those sort of edge cases for the ugly stuff that isn't really currently in a machine readable format. So yeah, if the goal is to make it easy for somebody to construct a CCO from a bunch of fairly easily machine readable sources, that part seems straightforward, and maybe that's where the emphasis should be initially.
Yeah, I think there's not, like you pointed out, there are a number of connectors that could be built to like EndNote. None of this is really high tech stuff, but it's really pulling together those components into a CCO generator library and having it be, deployable on, a journal's website or somewhere else like an institutional repository, so that they could easily make use of it and customize it. It's open source, so the idea is a journal wants to have slight variation on CCO, what you include in a CCO. They could modify the generator tool for their specifications. I saw Kogan come on. I think he's trying to wrap up the session, or let me know. I'm going to close my window so I don't have to cover my face. Hold on. Go for it.
No, I was just hopping on because I didn't realize my camera was off this whole time. But if it is time to wrap up here shortly, I'm happy to do that. But I think we have 10 more minutes, right?
May I make one comment on
for sure.
what was just said? Just to stress that the complex citation metadata is very limited. So we don't want to duplicate citation information of the LDOs, because then we have to maintain it within this object. So that was not the target. I see this accessing of LDO metadata more in the context of either assigning credit, so unpacking the CCO, or as the validator to check, is this a reliable source which is used as LDO, and not that much on the generator side. But Jonathan might have a different opinion on that.
Yeah, the validator might be part of the generator in the iterative loop of finalizing the CCO. So pretty much all that's needed is to check that link exists, and that it's not like going to like the Washington Post website, which has nothing to do with what you're trying to do. Sometimes, especially if you're manually generating that initial list, it's likely you'll get some of those links wrong. They need to be validated. So I'm looking at the chats. I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody's comments that all throughout the session. This has been very, very good session from my perspective because of the dialogue. And I saw something above about it came from Doug Phil said that we have to look at RAID. I always confuse RAID and RO crate, so you have to excuse me. There are a lot of things in this space that kind of seem to be doing the same thing, and I need to learn more about that. Do you want to speak at all about RAID, Doug?
Oh, I mean, I don't need to shill for the raid people, but it's kind of like, I mean, I know some of them. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily overlap, but I think there might be some complementary aspects between raid and what you're talking about here. So I think it would be interesting to look at them.
Mhm. And also the idea of using Shackle. Yeah, I think we could, once we have a standard for CCOs, the Shackle could be a way that journals, for example, could specify their particular variations on the CCO standard if they want to see certain level of detail or not too many records or whatever constraints they want. It could be a good way for them to do that.
Definitely, that's a mechanism that could be enabled with Shackle. So, yeah. I mean, one of the things I saw when looking at this, right, is that if the OREs are really just a data graph, which it sounds like they are, right, then it opens up the thought that maybe you want to take advantage of some of the graph query approaches, whether that's Sparkle, whether that's Cipher, however you want to do it, whatever kind of functionality you're actually going after. And then also realize that there's a lot of analytics that you can run on a graph and stuff like that too that might be value adds coming out of something like this. So
yeah, I personally have looking at how in the end of this process how we can make use of CCOs in our organization, and it would be one way to understand the data that contribute to our enterprise at a larger scale. So you get these through individual CCOs, publications, and the data that they cite. But then you take a step back and look at all your publications over a period of time, and you can understand the data that support your mission. So it's kind of at a higher level. And I think maybe that's where the graph query might come in, is if you have that repository of CCOs and you want to query across.
sure. I mean, independent of any kind of architectural or implementation approaches, it probably would be good, I think, based on some of the discussions that took place here, to really kind of identify what some of the personas and use cases and value propositions are for all this that's going forward, right? Because I think that's has the potential to impact some of the downstream decisions you take from that. So I would encourage, I think several other people did throughout here, really kind of looking at what the value proposition, functional goals, target audience, personas, things like that are in this.
Good suggestion. And we could use that both. We have an implementation group that complements the technical group in the RDA working group. And they're looking more at that social dimension. But I think your suggestion is also true for the CCO generator component. We need to understand who are the users of that. What are they trying to accomplish? And we'll take that advice. Corey went off his video, but I saw his hand.
Yeah, thanks. I know we're getting close on time, but I wanted to just, like, after hearing this conversation, as a technical person looking to potentially engage on the software side and look towards supporting some implementation stuff, the first thing that I would want to see, and that would unblock me from being able to like actively understand and look at like the generator project, is still a specification. And so something so I understand that maybe there's some tension where it's like, oh, things are still work in progress, we're not really ready. It's like sharing those kinds of documents early with technical communities, I think, can be a really beneficial thing. And so I would just encourage that part of the process. It sounds like that's open in the sense that like people sure can go to the RDA meetings, but having that foregrounded in terms of like public documentation, like draft specifications, both in terms of like actual like JSON specs, but also, very clearly like the working assumptions of like where is this document supposed to live? What are the actors that access it, that create it? Those kinds of things. And like, what's the current state of the working group's thinking would be beneficial to see, even at an in progress stage.
I think I've copied the link. I'm just going to check. I should have checked it first, but yeah, okay. This is what I wanted to share. So this is there are two versions of the same template. Let me check the second link. One is a spreadsheet, so that's much more like human readable, but they're both color coded the same way. So this is what I would propose as the specification for CCOs. And recognizing we might use DCAT as well to express the same thing in the future.